Hello, everyone. For those of you that are just joining, I'll give it about a minute until I start to see the attendance level off. In the meantime, if you'd like, you can put where you're tuning in from or your organization in the chat. Awesome. Mount Grace. Great, we have people from all over. Thank you all for joining today. I'm just going to give it a few more moments, and then I'll get started with the webinar. All right, well, it seems like our attendance is leveling off, so I'll begin. Hello, and welcome to the fourth and final week of the 2021 Massachusetts Open Space Conference. I'm your host, Jonathan Harstick. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at Sudbury Valley Trustees and a member of the Planning Committee for this conference. I want to personally thank you all for attending today. We've had a great turnout for this conference. We've had over 300 attendees representing over 40 different open space committees from all across the state. It's really great to see this type of representation and an increase in attendance this year from previous years. This online platform is definitely something that we found to be very effective, and it'll probably be something that we will continue to see in the future. So again, thank you all for joining us. This session will be focused on conducting outreach, networking, and maintaining relationships so that you can accomplish all of your conservation and open space goals. Next slide, please. As a quick acknowledgement, I want to give a thank you to the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation for funding this conference through the Working Forest Initiative. This conference wouldn't be possible without that help, so thank you. Next slide, please. As a couple of housekeeping items, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available at the conclusion of the conference. It will be posted on our website as well as our YouTube channel. As an attendee, your webcam is currently off and you're muted. So if you're sitting back on the couch in your sweatpants, that's completely fine. You can also find additional resources about today's topic and all our other topics on the conference website. And as a reminder, please don't forget to fill out that evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. It really helps us out with this conference, and we use the feedback from last year's sessions to shape what we were doing this year. So we really do take what you say to heart. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. A little bit more on functionality. So you can move your cursor to the bottom of the screen. Please take note of the chat and the Q&A functions. The chat box is for just general comments or any information you'd like to share. I originally said that you could share your organization and where you're tuning in from. So feel free to add that if you weren't here earlier. And then also I want to note that please, if you're going to ask questions of the speakers, use the Q&A function. That's so we just don't lose track of any questions, and they're all in one place so that we can get to all the great questions that you have. Next slide, please. And now for today's speakers. We have Dave Small, Colin Novick, and Robert McArthur. So to start, first up will be Dave Small. He's a lifelong resident of Massachusetts. He's currently the president of the Athol Bird and Nature Club and director for the Millers River Environmental Center. Dave shares his passion for birds, butterflies, and dragonflies, and most recently moths, through workshops, lectures, field trips around New England, and sharing his passion in different ways that he can. He's organized biological inventories, finding and documenting state-listed species for the Massachusetts Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. He's worked with various conservation organizations, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and other local communities. For over a 30-year period, he was responsible for the creation of more than 300 acres of open field habitat in the Quabbin and Ware River watersheds. Officially retired in 2013, Dave is able to continue to share his passions with others and serve on the Athol Open Space Committee. Our next speaker is Colin Novick. He is a Worcester native and an alumnus of the University of Chicago. Serving as the executive director of the Greater Worcester Land Trust, he has pursued conservation for the last 2 decades. Colin has also served on the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition and worked with the Appalachian Mountain Club, the Bolton Land Trust, and the Regional Environmental Council. He also serves as the deacon for the Cathedral of St. Paul in the Diocese of Worcester. And then lastly, we have Robert McArthur. He is the Conservation Administrator and Director for the Conservation and Open Space Division of the City of Framingham. Robert has more than 30 years of experience in conservation land management, planning, environmental permitting, and park interpretation. He is also an avid photographer in his spare time. Robert will also be joined by Framingham's Communication and Land Stewardship Coordinator, Katie Colin. And so with all that being said, I'll invite Dave Small to share his screen and to unmute himself so we can begin the presentation.
All right. I believe we're up and running. Well, welcome everyone. I'm happy to be here to discuss one of my favorite areas that I'm currently working on. That's the South Athol Conservation Area. And I was there today, and I'll probably go back this evening. So it's really great to share this with you. So first off, we're in a land of Zoom, and it really has made the last year very different than what we've done in the past. And I do think that there are lots of good things that we've learned from working with Zoom. And the fact that we've been able to have meetings all winter with various groups without having to travel at night in the snow has been kind of a positive aspect of it. But, we all do yearn for the times that we can all get back together. And it's certainly a lot easier to network if we're in person than we are when we're on screen like we are today. So we look forward to that subtle shift as we get back to the new normal. But, when we look at community outreach, I kind of think about community outreach as something that happens really every day that we're out in the community. The whole idea of working with land conservation and these different projects is really it's personal to people, and it's personal to the neighborhoods. And wherever we stop for coffee or stop for dinner, having people recognize who you are and getting to know the community, I think is a pretty good way to start your whole idea of bringing ideas to the community and having people know who you are and what you represent. I think that's that happens 365, that whole part of that operation. So the area we're going to talk about a little bit today is the South Athol Conservation Area. And in 2015, we were able to purchase this 200 acres with the help of EOEA and the Mount Grace Land Trust and the town of Athol and lots of partners. And it really has been going well. But how do we get there? And a lot of what we did early, myself and members of the Bird Nature Club and Mount Grace, was actually to get to know the property. We spent quite a bit of time before the purchase to actually get to know what animals live there, what butterflies were around. There were lots of vernal pools in the property, and some interesting other habitats. We found various, certified several pools. Had great looks at spotted salamanders. In fact, last night we had a movement of spotted salamanders and lots of wood frogs and spring peepers, and I even had a redback salamander. So all down right in this area. And the other thing that we did was actually go out and look at dragonflies. That's one of my specialties, but we found several interesting species, including the eastern red damsel. That's not a very common species that I've encountered in our region, and just an added little benefit. But getting to know the area was really, in my mind, the natural history of the area was pretty important to be able to articulate to people why I thought this area is worth conserving. The other interesting thing that I think is important is actually finding the social connection of the area. This area happens to be adjacent to the Morgan Memorial Goodwill Camp that's currently not being operated, but Mount Grace, through their work, has conserved 330 acres of this property that is adjacent to our 200-acre Athol conservation land. So there's a direct connection between the two. The the camp was there for many, many years, and really lots and lots of people from across the state filtered through here through the Morgan Memorial Goodwill Industries. The center of South Athol is this is the way it looks today, with a very active church and community center. And we went to do our original outreach. We actually did it in this hall right here, right in the middle of South Athol. Even though we have facilities in the center of town, we wanted to bring our message to the neighborhood. And we invited all the abutters to the property and worked through the community church and whatever to get a good amount of local neighborhood input. So we wound up with a great evening at the Methodist Church Hall. We had probably 45 people attending. The church folks put on a good buffet for us, and I did a slide presentation that really highlighted what we knew about the area at the time. One of the other big features of the South Athol Conservation Area is this piece of old railroad bed that used to run from Athol to Springfield before the Quabbin was built, and the Quabbin severed that connection. But it was called the Rabbit Run, and it's quite an interesting story and a lot of historical impact in this whole thing. And a good section of this Rabbit Run runs right through this 200-acre South Athol conservation area. When I was doing the slideshow at the Methodist Hall, this is a picture of the South Athol rail station, and people actually recognized ancestors that are in this photo that were in the room and made a very personal connection. So I think some things like that can really help to get enthusiasm for the program, and really making those historical connections. So you both have the natural history and the human history combining on the site. So once we got, after this initial meeting with the local neighborhood people, we had a series of different nature walks by various naturalists. I did butterflies and dragonflies. We had another person come and do vernal pools. We had a couple of botany walks, and again, just getting people to accept what was going on there, and knowing that they were invited to share in the beauty of this new site. You know, it's great to get out there with a bunch of other naturalists and look around. Here we are looking at dragonflies. You know, the botany people got in, and we, you know, had a lot of neat things that we were able to look at. And, you know, even today, this was Kimlin Nugent from Mount Grace is out there today doing a baseline survey for a new piece of the property that we did out there, and she was excited to see this nice crop of cranberries in one of our spots. So, you know, we're learning stuff every day about the interesting aspects of this, and it really is really fun to try to do this whole thing. We're currently also we have received a trails grant from DCR. It's a $50,000 grant that we're improving access. We had quite a bit of blow down across the Rabbit Run, particularly from a storm last year, and we're getting that cleaned up, plus putting in a new access point on the White Pond Road side, on the western side, which currently doesn't have a formal way to get into the property. So all that's ongoing right now. There's a crew working there on the trails today. I was out there this morning and it was quite nice. So that's what's happening as we speak. So where do we go from here? And as I look at this whole area, and I think the engagement of this whole natural history, cultural history combination really is something that I want to nurture further. There's the rabbit run itself is really quite a story, and one of the members of the Swift River Valley Historical Society is building an HO gauge model of the railroad, and our future plans are to actually kind of incorporate a project with Swift River Valley and the Conservation Commission and other partners to actually do something to, and probably working with Athol Orange Television, the local TV station, to put together a little program on the Rabbit Run and highlighting our part of it. And that's really where we are at the moment. And I just really look forward to continuing this process. Through this Trails grant, we wound up getting a donation of another 11 acres, which gave us more frontage on the Thrower Brook and onto South Athol Pond. So now there's almost 2,000 feet of frontage on the pond, and just really outstanding to make it all happen. So that's basically where I am, and I'm happy to answer any questions or thoughts.
Thank you, Dave. It does look like we have some time for a little bit of Q&A. We did get one question in the chat. Are there any articles that you can suggest refuting the NIMBY argument for clearly not identifying access points to suburban open spaces that abut houses?
It's funny. I think we do have some issues with all of this, and right now we have an ATV problem, and most of the criticism that I've gotten is that there isn't enough control over those kind of marauding ATVs that come in from all over the place. And they actually have been rather happy about the thought that we were going to improve controlled access and actually be able to, one of the things that we wound up doing is buying a John Deere Gator, which will be out there to actually patrol at different times. But I've talked to many of the local neighborhood people, and really it's I think it's just a matter of communication and continuing to communicate with the neighbors. And we've really tried to answer most of their questions as it comes up, but my phone number is available. When we did the notice of intent for one of the trail projects, 3 or 4 more people showed up for that. And mostly what I'm getting is how do we volunteer, so to help out. And in fact, we were there this morning with a trail crew, and a man came in to use the trails, and he gave me his name and says he'd like to help do posting and whatnot. So I think I'm getting, but being available, I think, is really important, and not having it, not being somewhere else, and that's why I get back to that early point about having this communication. When you go to the coffee shop and you go to wherever you are, you kind of, they get to know you're a human being and not just the government's here to help,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point. We do have another question too that came in.
Yeah.
What's your biggest piece of advice for open space committees? What's maybe some of the common pitfalls?
Yeah. Well, again, transparency is great, and listening, and one of the issues is having, this ATV. Well, one of the butters is an ATV aficionado. And even though we disagree on some of these issues, but having lived here long enough and being a a recognized voice in the community, we're able to have a pretty good conversation, and even he is saying he doesn't want the big trucks and the big tired Jeeps around, but his type of recreation's okay, so so it's kind of funny, but just talking to people is the best way to resolve these things, and having a way for them to find you.
I think that's an excellent segue into what Colin's going to talk about too. He's talking about how you can be present in the community. One thing I noticed is that Frank Eatman, it looks like your hand is raised. Do you have a question that you could put in the chat, or is there a tech issue? I'll give you a minute for that, but we also did have another question that came in. Having clear parking signs is a huge help in setting limits on visitation. Working with local law enforcement about parking issues is helpful as well. Oh, so more of a comment, but yeah, thank you. I think that's an excellent point. Oh, okay, thank you, Frank. All right, so with that, I will allow Colin to come on screen, and he can share his slides. We can get started with the next presentation.
All right. So I was sort of focusing in particular on placing open space projects in neighborhoods that are in need, improving accessibility, and reaching out to diverse or underserved populations. I work in the city of Worcester, so this is sort of stuff that we would do and kind of stuff that we'd play with. And it's frozen. Come on, baby. There we go. All right. So I work with the Greater Worcester Land Trust, and we are this wild combination of forest and a dense urban downtown core. Just to give you a sense of who we are, founded in '87, got 1,340 acres in fee, 950 acres in CR, 17 acres in easements, and we've transferred either to the state or to a town's 546 acres. We're core operational in the city, and we have a presence in 9 towns. Also, just to give you a sense, we're tiny. 1.5 full-time equivalent staff. Everything is pretty much board driven. We have a 11-member board that meets twice a month. We got advisory council. We've got 9 farm volunteers, 791 volunteers over a year, over 300 members in a really small budget, 145,000. Small in context. I know that's big for some folks. For a land trust, that's kind of on the small end. Just to give you a sense of who the crazy guy is who's talking to you, I'm the executive director for the Greater Worcester Land Trust. And a part of what's core for all that we're talking about today is being part of the fabric of the community. So I have been with the Land Trust for over 24 years, which is a huge asset. I kind of joke that I'm not particularly smart, but my superpower is having been around for quite a while and getting to know folks and getting to have relationships. Things that are not super important in terms of local conservation, being born there, not key. Being raised there, not key. They could be helpful, but they're not key. Living in the community is huge, and having your office in the community so that you're day in and day out running into people is huge. So for those of you who are transplants or coming into a community, the whole, were you born here thing, that's not key, but being present in the moment is huge. Community connections are a really big deal, being part of the place and involving yourself in the community outside of land conservation. So you guys are in open space committees. Your superpower is everything else you do that isn't conservation, because that's how you get to know everybody else in the community. So for me, one of my things that I do is an election warden, and I've been an election warden for 20 years. And you get to meet all sorts of people all over your community, and everybody in the world comes in, and there are conversations that happen all day long. And I've done more conservation deals while being an election warden than you could possibly throw a stick at. Other things, I happen to be a deacon at a church. It gives me a chance to contact people I would never contact otherwise and do things I would never otherwise do. So again, a key part of doing land conservation from an open space committee are all the other things you do, your job, your kids, your community, your clubs. That is how you learn about the projects. That's how you learn the relationships. That's how you make deals happen. Other strange things. I'm a notary. I get called in to sign crazy documents for people I would never otherwise know. And that's sort of the magic of doing land conservation in a community and being connected with the community is everything else that you do. So I will also say, if you're working for underserved communities, there is a thing you need to be in sync with, and it's called EJ areas, environmental justice areas. If you go to Oliver, which is the Mass GIS state viewer, which most of us have had a chance to play with, there is a layer called Census 2010 environmental justice populations. This category is a map that shows your community and the different ways there are different needs and different groups that sort of are usually underrepresented. Now, two things. Not only do you want to try to help that out and sort of for all sorts of good justice and moral reasons, you also get bonus points when you're applying for grants. So if you're looking to do a project, doing one in an environmental justice area is even good for you. It's good for your project. So go for it. Reframing access. So I'll say that if you're working with underserved populations, if you've got public transit in your community, think of your open space in terms of how would someone get there from public transit. Also, because not everywhere has public transit, bike racks at all the trailheads, bike racks at all the openings. Make it easy for people to get to your property. It's a big deal. The other thing I'll say is, all right, we've been talking about environmental justice areas to sort of find those populations that need assistance. All right. Then you want to overlay your open space on top of it. This is a map that I did in MassGIS Oliver, where I turned on the EJ areas. I cranked back so it was half transparent, and then I dropped all the protected open space on top of it. So you can see where there are populations that need assistance, where is the open space, which leads you to the next exercise. Where are the gaps? Okay, so this is looking at density and proximity and looking at different designations. If you look at the center of the city where you've got that dark gray, dark black on the left, and you've got that bright red on the right, those are areas that simply are underserved. They don't have enough open space. They don't have enough access to open space. They have too many people for the open space they've got. So having these maps in your head when you're walking around and talking to people, when you're at open space committee meeting, gives you a really good sense of where you should be thinking about focusing work. And then there's the open space plan itself. I love the open space plan. I've been involved in something like 5 open space plans for Worcester. When I get a chance, I'll go out to Paxton or Leicester or Auburn and take play. I love open space meetings. Having everybody come in and make out their list for Santa Claus is awesome. Like, if you could have any park in the world, what would it be? If you could have any trail connection in the world, what would it be? Are there, special birds? Are there special fish? What is it that you want? And every year, every time we go through this exercise, it's something different. This last year, we were really focused heavily on skateboard parks. The previous cycle, it was all about dog parks. The previous cycle before that, it was about pocket parks. And each time, that intervening 5 to 7 years, we do some of those projects. We answer some of those people's needs. So attending meetings, man, it is everything. And more meetings. These are all open space meetings, and just keep going to meetings. But the beautiful part about this is not the talking part, it's the listening part. Bring a notebook, sit in the back, write down what people are saying. Now, we are educated folks who know a lot about open space, so we're going to have a lot of opinions, and that's cool. But save your comment till the end. Let everyone else have a chance to do it first and sort of work it out where you sort of do your data dump at the very end. But listening is huge at these meetings. Our interesting partnerships pop up. So for instance, we have a stripe that runs north to south of needing environmental justice, economic justice projects. We worked on a trail with a partnering nonprofit that crossed all the way from one side of the community to the other. And that necessarily linked some of the higher income areas and some of the lower income areas. It took us through areas that had lots and lots of open space and took us to places that didn't have enough, where we had to preserve more. So partnerships are also a great way of sort of teasing that out. This particular one was Park Spirit, which is a nonprofit. Sometimes you've got a partner, you've got an advocate, somebody who wants something to be happening, and that is phenomenal. If there's somebody who already is there and already knows what they want, go with it. Partner with them. So we had a group called Women Together, Mujeres Unidas, and they had a vision. Problem was that their vision was this lot that was just covered in trash. It was terrible. It had everything. It had granite blocks. It had dumping. It just was, oh my God. But anyway, listening. They had a vision. The whole bit about is not coming to it with your open space hat. Listening. What do these people want? They could see something I couldn't see. And they ended up seeing something that the city couldn't see. Now, through a wonderful thing, we talked to EOEEA, DCS, Bob O'Connor, Melissa Krein, and the gang, and said, these people have a vision and they need to be able to articulate it. And EOEEA helped them out and got the Trust for Public Land and the Conway School to come in and help them articulate their vision. And they did listening and they did writing and they sketched things out in a storyboard and they started to design a park. And then they had a master plan. And the beautiful part of the master plan is that then they brought it to city council, who previously didn't get the idea, didn't believe in the park, and all of a sudden, bam, they got unanimous support to go forward and seek a state grant. And they got their grant. And they got their grant partly because they had demonstrated to the state and to the city council and to the rest of the community, they had a vision and they could see what it was supposed to be. And then you stand back. Ribbon cuttings. They had a piano just left in the park for a year where people just came by and played it. On Halloween, they give out books to kids in the neighborhood. People go there for photo shoots who are on different dance teams. The community keeps doing cleanups. The mayor has a walk and wants to walk through the neighborhood. This is where the mayor meets with the neighborhood. This is where the neighborhood comes down and decorates the pine trees with Christmas decorations. This is where they have had memorials for violence. And this is where they've had memorials for people who died from drug overdoses. It has become a community center. And it was one of those where the vision was entirely there with an advocate. Our job as the land trust, as the open space advocates, was to help walk them through, how do you get this into the open space plan? Who are the people who have the grants? What do the grants use for, judging? There's a point system. How do you score the most points possible? We could be a guide, but they were someone who had a vision. There's also things, if you hang around and do this open space thing for a while, you'll see that there are lists of things we all want to do that just don't get done. And many times there isn't anyone to advocate for it. So I'm looking at this list from 87. A lot of these things got protected. This was all our what's left list for Worcester. If you look at Poor Farm Brook North and you look at Coal Mine Brook, both of which are ones that have EJ populations. They have communities that are in need, but they don't have an advocate. So Coal Mine Brook, we stepped in and we were able to help protect that land. Poor Farm Brook was just sitting out there. Something like 15, 17, 20 years of being identified as a resource area. Nothing. Nobody stepping forward. Right next to it, housing authority land. So we as a land trust decided we needed to step forward. There wasn't an advocate, but there were resources. There were things that needed to be done. And then we started working to see what kind of partnerships we could come up with. So we came up with a partnership between an office park, which was going through transition, looking for a new buyer. The school department was looking for a bus hub, and all the land in between had conservation value. And we were able to work together and come up with a design for a plan, assuming it comes up. Come on, girl. There you go. So if you look at the bright green right in the center, that is the conservation space that links a park to the north and a park to the south. You get the brook that's running through the whole thing. But we've also identified a corridor where it's not just that project. We're going to look to see how much of this corridor we can put together. So this is a population which has been designated. It doesn't have an in-house group, but the resources are clear. The opportunities are clear. So we as the open space advocates are stepping up to make sure it gets done. You also just keep listening. All these meetings, there's always someone coming forward. So for instance, this is a 16-20-20-20 series, which Holy Cross was doing. And there is a local group of Nipmuc Indians, and there is the original Village Spring, which is in the midst of development. And we're trying to work with that community to see if we can preserve some of the last lots that are left that contain that original spring that their community was founded around. And it's part of our local history. I mean, there wouldn't be a Worcester if it hadn't been there. So again, listening, there are groups, there are individuals, they've got a vision, and then we've got a toolbox and we've got expertise as open space people, and we can help guide them through that process. So in terms of urban open space, I'm coming from it from a different place than some folks in more rural communities. So this will be kind of fun as you look at my list, because some of it will freak you out, and that's fun. If you are in a city or in a dense area or even a dense village, many cases you don't have much of a yard. Here in our community, we have a lot of things that are 3-deckers, and what used to be the yard is now paved over so everybody can have a place to park their car. So now you've got a whole bunch of houses that are 3 stacked up, and you've got no yard and a place to park your car. Open space here in our community is a shared common backyard. And that changes the way we look at open space. For instance, it's all about public access. I cannot imagine doing an open space project in the city of Worcester where public access was not guaranteed. Just no way. Like, open space is all about sharing a common backyard, because none of us have enough of a common backyard. So there really aren't any conservation deals that we do that don't have full public access. Even when we do a conservation restriction, there's access, there's trails, there's something. There's always some way in. Also, non-traditional. What does your community need? If you're listening, concrete handball courts. Not on the top of your list as an open space person, probably, to think you're going to do concrete handball courts. We have a conservation restriction on a property. It has concrete handball courts. Why? There's a lot of people in the city of Worcester who need to do handball. Who knew? Listening to the community is a big deal. Active playing fields. This is not unusual. What is interesting, though, is some open space committees are willing to do the dance with active recreation. Little leagues, soccer leagues, field hockey. But also there are other ones that are shy. And I'll say that in the city of Worcester, it's a big deal. We do traditional farms, we do fields, we do forests, like most open space folks might. But we also have a conservation restriction on a zoo. We have a conservation restriction on a golf course. In an urban area, these are needs. These are things that need to be had. Hiking trails, fairly traditional. Community gardens and tree nurseries, maybe not so traditional, and particularly the size we're talking, 4,000, 5,000 square feet, maybe 7,000 if you're lucky. Pocket parks, how many folks want to take on a less than 1 acre parcel that's surrounded by housing and surrounded by streets that is likely to get trash? Well, we are. So we've got a conservation restriction on Pleasant Winslow Park. And it is less than 1 acre in size, and it is surrounded by housing, and it's got a bus line, and it needs a litter pickup, but that's what's needed in the community. And also we work in non-traditional places. We look for open space under power lines, water lines. We've even got a highway cow tunnel that we boast is part of our trail network. So looking in interesting ways, but listening to what people are looking for. It may lead you in weird directions you wouldn't expect open space to go. For instance, the weirder ones, we now have an open space with chess tables. You just never know what might come up. And then I'll lastly say that if you are willing to listen and sort of see where the project takes you, it will absolutely change your life. We now have a farm in the city of Worcester. I now have to carry around sheep. This is not part of what I was originally dreaming of. But this is what we had, and this is what people wanted to protect. It's the last farm. It is the last tie to agriculture. You follow that thread, you follow and you listen to people, you may end up a farmer of sheep. And that's what I've got.
Thank you, Colin. That was great. I think we're pretty much ahead on schedule as well. So if you'd like, we can answer a couple of Q&A questions right now.
Sure.
I saw the first one in the chat. That was funny. What is a highway cow tunnel?
Right. So let me kill this presentation. The highway tunnel. So we are part of the Mid-State Trail, much like many other folks. And it turns out that where the Mid-State Trail crosses Route 20, there are no bridges over it, and there are no tunnels under it. Except there happened to be a farm that was severed by Route 20. And in order to accommodate the farmer, they made a tunnel underneath Route 20 for him to his cows back and forth. And that is how you can safely have the Mid-State Trail cross from one side of Route 20 to the other. So now we tell people that they moo as they go through this tunnel because it's a concrete tunnel under the highway.
That's great. We had another question. So transportation is a complicated issue. This is Elizabeth from Mount Grace. Because Mount Grace serves a more rural area and public transportation is not ideal. Do you have any advice on how to make properties more accessible for people that may be in rural areas?
So, I mean, the two things that immediately leap to my mind are making your trail network into a transportation network, where your trails, in some cases, link parts of your community with one another. I will tell you that in some of the rural places, you can almost run on the trail faster from point A to point B than you can take your car because the road doesn't go in a straight line. Again, all the trailheads having bike racks to encourage people to take their bike there, whether or not they've got a bus that's available to them. And then lastly, start to get creative. Encourage people to start thinking about skiing. Also, there is an extensive off-road vehicle contingent in Massachusetts. If you're in a highly rural area, look at whether or not you can work with either the snowmobile or ATV clubs to create a different kind of network, one that isn't strictly speaking the roads and highways, but sort of links open space together. The culture of many rural communities include these off-road highway vehicles, and maybe there's an opportunity there. It could be sort of there's a black market, but there's also a black transportation network.
Yeah, it seems like it comes down to, really listening to the community and what's already going on there. Another question. Any suggestions for working with the abutters to open space, having active recreation such as hiking trails, who may not want an increase in traffic to the space, while one of our goals is to encourage use of open space? Kind of a conflict
So I will tell you that I like to move really slowly when it comes to new trailheads. So the first thing that I'll do is we'll protect the land. All right. And then we'll sit back. Remember, we are owning this land for forever. Time is not a big deal. We can wait. So wait 6 months, wait 9 months, and then put up a sign, but nothing more than that. Wait another 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year. Make it so that you've got a little place to pull off. Don't just come in like a hammer of God with this sort of like designed mega like trailhead and then like have it drop out of the sky like a space alien craft. Really slow, like let people get used to the fact that it's conserved. Then let people get used to the fact that there's a sign, and then let them get used to the idea that maybe once in a while someone might park there. And then like maybe increase it to a couple spaces. I mean, right now, we just increased one of our parking areas to like 12 spaces. If we had started off with 12 spaces, everyone would have had a brain aneurysm. We started off with 3 spaces, and then it became 5, and then it became 7, and now it's 12. And everyone loves it, and everyone wants there to be more space. But gradualism is huge. Let people adjust to it. Don't have something drop out of the sky like a brick. It's too much. That's my advice.
I'll also bring back this question from earlier. What would be your biggest piece of advice for open space committees?
Get out and talk to people. Go to the church groups. Go to the different clubs. Go to the people you don't expect to have an opinion about open space. Go to the diner and ask people. And remember, we speak in a lingo if we hang out in an open space committee too long. We talk about conservation land and stuff like that. No. Like ask people about their favorite trails. Ask them about the favorite park. Ask them about a park that they grew up in when they were a kid and what were their favorite play elements. Like break it down and just keep making notes, and then find the people who are really juiced about it, like really excited and have energy, and then tap them. So yeah, you'll probably have 50 conversations, come up with 2 good contacts, but man, those 2 people are to die for. So wear it on your sleeve. Have it. Everybody should know that you do open space stuff. I mean, the reason why all these land trust people wear fleece vests, so we can be identified. If you have an open space opinion, you can find your land trust person. They're wearing a fleece vest. I don't know. Talk to as many people as possible. Look for the most unusual people. Women Together, Mujeres Unidas, they were in a storefront. They were talking about equity for women. They were talking about violence in the community. And all of a sudden they wanted to do a park project. They were phenomenal. They were huge. There was no task I could give them that they were not able to accomplish. They were magical. They were amazing, amazing people. They were also the least likely person I would ever have gone to do a park project. And they did phenomenally.
Thank you, Colin. That was great. And now I will transition to having Robert come on along with Katie for our last presentation.
Is my video on? There it is. So I'm Rob McArthur. I'm the Conservation Administrator for the City of Framingham. Been there for about 7.5 years. Before that, almost 30 years with the state park. So this I'm starting with this slide just because this shows one of our trails through the Carol Getchell Trail. We have worked on creating a conservation master plan for our conservation properties, of which we have about 500 acres. But I wanted to concentrate on getting people involved. So next slide, Katie. So one of the first things, obviously, is your open space and recreation plan and developing it. So our new plan is was submitted in draft form in December of last year. So we're working with the state right now to do whatever tweaks and stuff that they want. One thing that we concentrated on was, I think a lot of the plans previously were written and often set on a shelf to serve their purpose of being able to, point to it so that you can get some grants. But we wanted it to be more useful than that going forward. So, we had worked a lot with people within town government, but wanted to get more input from the public. So next slide, Katie. So in developing the open space and recreation plan, we had these visioning meetings and we talked with the public and we broke them out into little groups. So there were a lot of these boards like on the right with all the Post-its on it, some of them very colored so that you could tell which table they were coming from. This one's all in one color. So I imagine it was just one group. But looking at what was important to people. So Framingham is a very unique community in that it still has a lot of rural space in the northwest corner, but a lot of environmental justice in the southeast corner and a lot of the south side. So when you're looking at open space opportunities, there might not be parcels that are that much available on the south side, and yet you still want those people to be engaged, and you also want them to be your allies when you see that large parcel up in the northwest corner that you still want to acquire. You want them to feel like it matters to them too, even though they feel like there's not enough protected land in their area. So in looking at everything, one of the things we really wanted to concentrate on was trails and trail connectivity. Go to the next slide, Katie. And so looking at all of Framingham, trails that exist and other opportunities. So within our conservation parcels, some of our largest parcels have some great trails within them. We have our largest parcel sits in the northwest corner, and working with Sudbury Valley trustees, we got a conservation restriction, but they got a 50-acre parcel on the opposite side of the road. And so again, working on trail connectivity with that land trust so that our trails at Wittenborg Woods can connect to their trails at Wayside Woods and grow into a larger connected space. So the Bayside Circuit Trail ties those together along with Callahan State Park. So those were some of the kind of things we're looking at. We have the Bruce Freeman Trail, which runs all the way to Lowell, abandoned railroad that runs all the way to Lowell, cuts across a number of other abandoned rail lines and trail opportunities. And Framingham's the last portion. We haven't acquired our portion yet, so we're working with CSX to try and do that. But where it ends, sort of at Route 9, we wanted to try and work on how then to connect it down to further south into the city. And we also have a number of the MWA aqueducts crossing town. So working with the MWA, again, with the environmental justice area, sometimes getting those trail connections and a nice aqueduct, which sometimes has some green space because it's passing through some wetlands and stuff. And in places it might have properties backing right up to it. But if you can help preserve that and get those people out on that trail, that is sometimes their main opportunity for open space, but it serves them not just as open space and getting out and getting exercise, but also getting them elsewhere in the just within their neighborhood as a more convenient way to get to the downtown area on Hollis Street, or hopefully eventually to be able to connect further out through much of the rest of Framingham. So we're working on the Cochiti Rail Trail on the eastern side of town. And Natick is completing their section of that. I actually have a meeting with them this weekend. Go to the next slide, Katie. And so one of those things is as you develop those trailheads, as some of the other speakers were talking about, is making sure that they're identifiable. And so one of the things in the conservation master plan that you'll see is that we focused on trying to create some branding to make our kiosks, we were lacking a lot of kiosks, but to make our kiosks more uniform, the signage more uniform, so that people can recognize our properties and get out. And then having come from state parks, even as I moved up through state parks, I always remained connected to my origins, which was as a park interpreter and naturalist. And so a lot of times the best way to get people out and then engage and to talk about them and find out some of their interests is through an interpretive program, a discovery walk, a night walk where you might be able to go out and hear the owls. Or we had a great one along the Carol Getchell Trail where it was a dusk walk and just the number of fireflies that were there. And so you have that kind of magic that ties people to a property, and then you can talk to them about other interests that they may have. And the other is obviously with COVID, we haven't been able to do it, but things like the Earth Day Festival on the town center common, or in June when we have Riverfest, having programs, whether they're stationary like at Earth Day, where you can meet people as they come to your booth, your tent, or the Riverfest where we did particular walks, or sometimes considering blue trails, the rivers, doing an actual kayak or canoe program. So so go to the next slide, Katie. So this is the Bruce Freeman. So I sort of talked about it and its connections. You can see where it's completed. Sudbury's the next community that's doing fairly well. And then just below Route 20, they have a section that they need to acquire. And then there's Framingham's portion. Go to the next one. Oh, I thought it was going to take me downtown, but that's all right. Again, those kind of connections. So in a place like Saxonville, which is a built up area, old mill village portion of Framingham, that has retained a lot of its character as a village, with the mills there still there and being used for alternative uses and stuff. But the Cochiti Rail Trail comes into Saxonville in the lower right-hand corner. And so we've had, again, a very energetic advocate who's a great advocate for conservation, a great advocate for our invasive species programs, but also for trail connectivity. And so wanting to connect the CRT, the Cochiti Rail Trail, to the Carol Getchell Nature Trail. And so we have a levee that protects part of the mill village and mill area of Saxonville from flooding on the Sudbury River. It was built after large hurricane in the 50s that did flood all of that area. So trying to cross the Sudbury River and then right next to the floodgate, try and work with the groups and public works and stuff to get up on top of the levee and utilize it as a trail connection to get to the trailhead for the Carol Getchell Nature Trail. And from there, the Carol Getchell Nature Trail connects to the Weston Aqueduct, which MWA, we have a working relationship with to allow us to utilize that as a trail that heads west into Knobscott Village and connects with where the Bruce Freeman Trail would be, which goes up past Garden in the Woods and so forth. So some great opportunities to really tie things together and tie it all the way down to downtown Natick. So including or connecting with a neighboring community. One of the things, bike racks and stuff were mentioned. One of the things with the Carroll Gittrell Nature Trail, and when you talk about NIMBY issues, so we have people that are really advocating not to allow bikes on the Carroll Gittrell Nature Trail because it is a nature trail, and yet we're tying the Cochituate Rail Trail to it. So we want to have, again, Saxonville is one of the more unique villages within Framingham, with its own little shops and stuff. So what we have talked about, and whether it'll happen, is working with both groups, but to try and direct the bicyclists through Saxonville to connect to the Weston Aqueduct and onward, and not have them going on the boardwalks and stuff that are a part of the Carroll Gittrell Nature Trail. But we'll have to see. Right now, some of the bikes are utilizing it, which has created some of that less desirable interaction as people meet, a bike coming down a nice smooth boardwalk when they round a bend. So go to the next slide, Katie. Another trail that we've been looking at is the Chris Walsh Trail. Chris Walsh was our representative for Framingham, who passed away from cancer. So this is another one of the aqueducts, Sudbury Aqueduct, and talking about the challenges of connecting that trail, which gets us right to the MBTA station in Framingham, and then you cross that, and the Sudbury Aqueduct goes clear through that environmental justice neighborhood. But there are some leases that are on top of the aqueduct by the MWA. So trying to work with those and get through that. So this is a project that Parks and Rec has been working on. They do have an area from the other corner, the northwest corner of Farm Pond, heading out toward the Winter Street Dam on Reservoir 1. But as you can see on the right side, the white line that comes down, there is the active rail line that to Fitchburg has at least one abandoned track section with the tracks have been removed. And so whether there's an opportunity to connect the Bruce Freeman, utilizing that to the downtown area. We have some challenges there. There's a whole rail yard on the east side of the pond that blocks the historic. There was an area that was known as Harmony Grove long ago in the abolitionist period. And all those things are blocked off. So whether there's a way of sort of opening up the east side of Farm Pond as well, so that we can also have a loop right around this large pond tied to downtown, that would be important. So when I talk about trails and even discussing COVID, so one of the things that we've had as a challenge, when I came in, we had a stewardship program under a previous administrator, and one of the problems is that you do need to go out and you need to pick the litter on your properties, but unfortunately the stewardship program got worn out by doing that as their only task, so that each time you go back out, it looks like the same property, with the same trash and everything. So you don't always get to enjoy the reward that you've had in cleaning it up. Katie, can you go back to the map slide? No, the general one for the whole community. Right there. So in looking at a lot of this trail connectivity, this is just one aspect of the open space and recreation plan, and it's even just one aspect of our conservation master plan that allows us to work on tying the neighborhoods and the special villages of Framingham together, and tying the south side of Framingham, which is very different from the north side of Framingham, together. So trails is one of the ways that we looked at it, and conservation has traditionally been, the focus of passive recreation, and our, very urban community like parts of Framingham, Parks and Rec was much more active recreation, but they also have the staffing, not as much right now with COVID. So they've had some of the same problems we have, but they've had the staffing, and So working with them, and it's been important lately because when I first started, we started a seasonal land management crew, which was very important, but that also sort of managed to push our stewardship program to the side. And so learning one thing with COVID when I can't fund the seasonal crew is the importance of trying to bring back our stewards and get them involved with the properties again, and not by utilizing them to pick trash, but utilizing them for some of our greater needs for our conservation parcels. And so we have a lot of opportunities and need to go back out and update baseline reports on conservation restrictions and conservation parcels. Do boundary marking, where somebody that's an avid hiker that loves to go off trail a little bit can head out into the woods utilizing the GPS on their phone and can help us in putting up some of our boundary markers. And then as we move forward with the conservation master plan, doing some trail marking so that our trails are marked sort of uniformly across the community as well. So we also do a lot of work with invasive species, both aquatic and terrestrial. And so again, I definitely want to get my seasonal crew back and work toward that goal. But Katie, who's our communications land stewardship coordinator, and people in that position preceding her, one of our goals has been to develop a list of contacts for stewards and then build on that and develop what are their interests and how do we get them involved. And you'll find some people that are very interested in setting up pollinator gardens, or some people that are very interested in invasive species management, and those that are interested in just getting out into the woods and onto the trails. And we could utilize those people for helping to put up some of our trail markers or our boundary markers and so forth. So with a full-time staff of 3, which is large for a conservation commission, but not so large when you have a city the size of Framingham. And so, and with the permitting with a city the size of Framingham, the permitting often pulls us away too much from our land management opportunities and duties. And so redeveloping and establishing our stewardship program is important. And so I'm not necessarily an expert on it because we're sort of muddling through to get it back in place. Very successfully set up the seasonal conservation crew, but now with them again gone, at least temporarily, hopefully, it has emphasized the need for getting other means of devoted people out there on your properties, and hopefully having a steward that is tied to each property and sort of like the captain of that ship. So that go to the very end slide, Katie. So there's my contact information in the middle. Erica, who's our deputy director, was originally going to work on this program with Jonathan. And then Jim Schneider, who's our Parks and Rec director, Parks, Rec, and Cultural Affairs. So I think a key that I've been learning lately is how to get greater involvement within the city departments as well, and not just go it alone as the conservation administrator, or even have Parks and Rec go it alone, because they've had resource cuts as well. But we have one 50-acre parcel that I found out that the parks foreman loves to walk his dog there. And so great opportunity to tap into somebody that could really help out and had an interest in it. And so we've gotten a bunch of assistance from Parks and Rec. They also, because of equipment that they might have assisted us greatly in managing some of our meadows and doing the grass cutting that we need once or twice a year. So it's important to get them involved, but also to, at least from our point of view, to sort of educate them as far as how we might want to see that, and not just mowing the field on a regular basis, but why we mow it at the time of year we do, and as infrequently as we do, to keep the woody plants out, but to allow the wildlife to thrive in such a space. So I don't know if anyone had any questions specific for me, or we could go to the general questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert.
Yep.
We did get one question, I think specifically for you.
Okay.
The question was, phone GPSs aren't usually very accurate. So how has that worked out with setting boundaries when you have, a volunteer doing that type of work?
So we would work with them ahead of time. So a lot of the nice thing about New England is a lot of times your conservation restrictions have parcels where old stone walls are the boundaries. So the GPS can get them into the general vicinity. And our markers that we're putting on the trees aren't necessarily intended to mark the exact boundary, but so that anyone coming onto the property knows that they're entering conservation land. So sometimes you're, attaching it to the closest tree you can, but not necessarily marking it right over the surveyed boundary line. And if there were areas that were more difficult or harder terrain to get across, that's where we would work with our seasonal crew to get them out to do those.
Thank you. We also have another question from Melissa. The first photo that you showed had a boardwalk in it. Is that through a wetland area? And how did you get a permit to be able to do that?
So that boardwalk has been there for a very long time. It's on the Carol Getchell Nature Trail, runs right along the Sudbury River, and does cross some wetland areas and so forth. So it went in before I was ever the agent, but as far as maintaining it, one of the things we do, we put together a general trails maintenance order conditions that we can use for our seasonal crew. DCR can use at Callahan State Park. The Boy Scouts can use at Knobscot Scout Reservation. Sudbury Valley trustees can use on their properties. And that's just for general trail maintenance and cutting things back so they don't have to come back to the Conservation Commission for every single project. But a larger project, a new bridge over a wetland or a boardwalk, might have to come to us. We would like to have at some point extend a lot of the boardwalks of the Carol Getchell Trail and make it ADA compliant or accessible. And sometimes when you're looking at that, you need to look at all the permitting aspects under conservation, daylight getting under the trail. So if the boardwalk's high enough to allow daylight to get under, so plants could still thrive there. But the higher you go, the wider you have to go so that it's safe. It also, at a certain point, you have to put railings on and stuff. But there's the other side of creating a disturbance is getting people out into an area where they can truly develop an appreciation for that area and a love for that area. I remember the night walk that we did on the Carol Getchell Nature Trail, where when you're listening carefully, you can startle a beaver on the Sudbury River and you'll hear his tail slap. You can hear the great horned owls calling, but when it's a colder weather night walk. But that summer night walk, which was in June, the lightning bugs, which I've never seen as many up here. Growing up in New Jersey, we always had a ton of lightning bugs, but I hadn't seen that many here. But they're right along the river with all that wet area. It was just really engaging and sort of magical. And I think the people on that interpretive program felt it that way as well. And so then they become that much more tied to the Carol Getchell and its condition. It is amazing at how fast a trail can sort of diminish maintenance wise with one summer without a seasonal crew. So utilizing the same PowerPoint just a week ago for a subcommittee of the city council was important, where we could try and emphasize the resource needs of maintaining these amenities that are so important to the quality of life for the people that live in your community. So, but again, it's with a boardwalk or even any nature, any kind of trail, when you need to balance the needs of the resource and wildlife and that kind of thing with the ability to get some people out, which can produce folks that are better educated and better connected to the world around them and the natural world around them. So.
I think you did a great job about explaining, how you make these trails and these projects and volunteering relevant for volunteers, really making sure that they're seeing the impact of their work.
Yeah. And I think you had asked me one question earlier that I don't think I touched on, but when in looking at trails, for instance, when doing the open space and recreation plan, trails is a natural part of that. So when we had that visioning project with all the post-its on the board, so there's probably a few little triggers that you give to use people to sort of emphasize the trail work, but you get at a workshop like that a lot of people that have their own special interests, and some of them might be mountain bikers, some of them might be regular bikers that want better trails, and biking just through the community on regular city roads and so forth. The nature photographer and the passive walker that might not want the bikes on the nature trail. So we got to hear a lot of that, as well as the differences between the two parts of Framingham, the more rural versus the more urban, and even trying to work through some of the feelings of some people where they live in the environmental justice and they feel like not enough has been provided for them. But when you look at it, the opportunities to provide for them is more difficult as well. So one of the very first things I did when I took over this job was I knew that I had a parcel up in the northwest corner that I wanted to preserve. And so I had looked specifically at the south side where there might be some parcels that could be acquired. And I came across an odd parcel that belonged to the school department. The school that had been there was torn down probably in the 20s. And so there's just this empty lot that was being leased to a neighboring triple decker for like $50 a month for them to park on. And it was the perfect opportunity in an area where nothing else was to create a little pocket park so that people walking their dog or just walking the sidewalks have a little oasis to step into. And that's being developed right now by the Parks Department. So, and again, those cooperative things between planning, conservation, and Parks and Rec, and even DPW, which manages the maintenance part of the Cochitiua Rail Trail. So getting all those people involved and then bringing in the public advocates that can help push your goals. And when they're pushing it, it resonates better with the mayor or the city council than when the staff are pushing it. So
that's great. Those connections are so important.
Yep.
So now I would like to invite all the other speakers back on screen, just so we can answer a few more questions. It doesn't look like we have too many questions in the Q&A. So if you do have any questions still, please put those in the Q&A and we can get to that. There's one question. What is the difference between an open space plan and a conservation master plan?
So for us, the open space and recreation plan serves the city as a whole, looks at both active recreation, passive recreation, parks and rec conservation, but looks at what is it called? A mental block. The streets program for our bike lanes and stuff on our roads, and creating that kind of ability for people to get out and recreate. Where the conservation master plan was specific to looking at the 500 acres that are under the care and control of the Conservation Commission, and looking at how to brand them better, how to improve the access to them, the kiosks and all those kind of things. And also looking at, we broke that plan down into our primary parcels, our secondary parcels, and then our tertiary parcels so that we could sort of look at them at that kind of level. And we are in the process of acquiring a property with Sudbury Valley Trustees as a partner that creates a missing link between two conservation parcels. And it just happened that the grant that we were going for is one that a nonprofit land trust could go for, and we couldn't. But in a way, it's, even though it's the missing link between our parcels, it's been an excellent cooperative program. We have a great ability of working with our local land trusts, but it gave us the ability to manage it as a whole. And it is a trail missing link. It's a 19-acre parcel that connects a ponded area up to the Boy Scout reservation and a section of Callahan State Park. And so, and the ability or the opportunity to work with Sudbury Valley trustees on that or on the other one that I mentioned is valuable.
There was just a point of clarification. Did you complete streets? And
Yeah, that's the term I was looking for. I had a mental block, but yeah, complete streets is one of the aspects that's in the open space and recreation plan.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A right now. So I just have some that I was thinking about as you all were talking. What is some of the best ways that you've found to engage some of those new underserved populations that, you know, might be harder to traditionally get involved in conservation and open space? What have you found to be effective ways? I know, Dave, you talked about going to church groups. Colin, you talked about, you know, meeting people where they're at in the community. Is there any like great events or advice or things that you can point to help people out with that? Oh, Colin, you're on mute, I think.
One crazy thing that we did was we got a bus and we took a group on a bus tour to different parks, and we all took notes of the things that we wanted to steal and bring back for the parks in their neighborhood. So, you know, we went and we visited water elements. We visited different styles of play facilities, and everybody sort of on the bus, you know, were, you know, the regular folks who lived in the neighborhood, and they all took notes. And when we came back, then we asked the question, what do you want to do? And it inspired people. You know, it's one of those where if you go to a neighborhood and you say, what do you want? They're like, can you fix the potholes and make sure that the sidewalk's not cracked? They don't even know what to ask. So like, you need to like, here is the shopping list. Let me take you by the appetizer bar and then ask the question, what do you want? And you're going to get much better answers.
And related to that, when you do an interpretive walk or when I have new staff, I often like to have them go out into a property, and I like to gather their first impressions first before I start feeding their head with this or that. And it often, because we get so familiar with our properties, they often see things that we've become accustomed to not seeing. So I think that's important. And tying somewhat to that, I think Colin and David might have talked about, there was a question about NIMBY issues. So in one of our environmental justice neighborhoods, we have a 16-acre swamp where people even wanted us to change the name of it because they didn't think swamp was very endearing to get people out there. I like the name swamp, and once you get people out there, it's a nice swamp when you get out in the middle of it. And so again, this was another area within the conservation master plan. If you look at, we were hoping to put a boardwalk that went up through the center of the property to get people out there to both connecting neighborhoods, but also to really get out and experience the swamp. Right now, we are dealing with some brownfields issues because part of the reason it was preserved was because of so much things that have been dumped on it. But we do have like just 2 neighbors that have been very successful in going around and petitioning people with their bent on things, their view of things, to sort of speak against doing anything back there. Even though when there's foliage on the trees, you wouldn't be able to see anybody on this trail. So we have to try and figure out a good way of sort of counteracting that to get other people that can see the vision. So, David, you're muted.
Yeah. I have one thought on that too. We just did the municipal vulnerability plan for the town, and we really made a big effort to reach out to these communities that aren't noticed so much in a lot of this planning activity. And well, we partnered with one of the local community organizations, Community Coalition, and they actually set up, interviews with people that wouldn't necessarily come out to a public meeting and actually looked at some of these things. So in a forum that they were more comfortable with and speaking to people that they already know, so that it kind of broke down those barriers. And we got a lot of great information about that, about what people thought and what they really did. But it was an idea of going to them instead of them coming to us, so to get a lot of good information on these groups that we don't normally see in a regular meeting.
That's a great point. Not everyone might be comfortable with the public process and familiar with how that works.
Yeah.
It looks like we do have another question. By having an OSRP, what other grants can be obtained to complete projects? What grants are available to helping with updating an OSRP?
So EOEEA DCS has a grant called Conservation Assistance for Small Communities. And if you have a very small population, they will give you money to help you with your open space and recreation plan. That only works if you're in that category, but if you're in that category, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and additionally, you have the conservation land grants, you have the parks grants. There's a number of grants that are often reimbursement grants, and to get fully reimbursed or to get a percentage of money awarded to you, one of the stipulations is that the community has a open space and recreation plan that they can point to that shows why a certain property might be a priority, and perhaps it's been there for 50 years and still hasn't disappeared for some reason, and you want to acquire it. So it's important for that. And those grants can be used for land acquisition, or such as the parks grant can be used for, developing amenities and stuff. So, and coming out of the open space and recreation plan are those things, as I think Colin might have mentioned, where people focus on a dog park. And right now Parks and Rec is getting close to developing the first dog park. And before that, it was a skate park. And I worked on the skate park committee more for the environmental conservation side and the permitting, but again, a cooperative effort to get it done. So I don't have a whole list of all the grants that are possible.
No.
But there's a bunch out there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
do the Google search for EOEEA DCS grants, and you'll get the list of 8.
Last week, we also had a lot of talk about different trail grants and things that you can look to obtain either federal or state funding. So if you're looking for more options about grants, you might want to watch last week's recording. Also Mimi noted that EEA also has planning grants, which will be released soon, that can be used for completing an OSRP. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. So if that's it, we can wrap this up. I want to thank you all for coming out here today. And thank you to all the speakers. Thank you also, Katie, for the tech support in the background. I want to thank you all, whether you came to one of the sessions or all of them. This has been a great conference to help plan out. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come here. We will have Anna will post the evaluation for this session in the chat. Also, we have a networking session tonight. It's going to be with a guided beer tasting that'll be led by Brett Peruzzi. So maybe if you're thinking about, attending, that could be a little enticement to come tonight. But yeah, again, just thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed today's presentations. Also, we have our Facebook and Instagram that you can follow if you want to learn a little bit more with follow-up on the conference, and then also what we're going to be doing next year. So again, thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.